All right, Roby One back with the documentary Part 3 to the Uxbridge Crossroads Underground Railroad from Uxbridge, Mass. 3/12/2019, and the history book. Let us return and continue with the speculation of the history, because everyone's very speculative right now. Yeah, Roby One, he's back, the flanky wanker.
Obliged to you for your present, and shall keep it to look at for your sakes, for I never expect to wear it out. With many wishes for your welfare and happiness, I remain your friend, Nancy Adams. That's the kind of story we don't get very often. It's really a remarkable account, and she lived here for many years. So we'll talk a little bit about why Uxbridge. So freedom stories. The first one we know about was in the 1780s. There were local families here who were protecting people on their farms. And some of these names might be familiar to you. We have Buffums and Farnhams and Caperings. Oh my. We have a woman named Abby Kelly, later Mrs. Foster. And these people are all connected with Uxbridge. They became leaders in the anti-slavery movement, very important people across the country, but they began that here. So let's talk about the Buffums first. The first Buffum I want to talk about is a gentleman by the name of William Buffum. William Buffum was a builder, and we know of a building that he built because it's here in Uxbridge. It's the Friends Meeting House on Glacier Highway.
That looks like a mud flood house. I gotta put that in there.
Now, his house still stands down in North Smithfield. And I've seen the historical record for his house, and they were very confused about his building style. They didn't know what to call it. So I'm just going to call it Buffum style. So William Buffum was a member of the Society of Friends, and one of their held beliefs, one of their earliest held beliefs, is that all people are created equal in the sight of God. And that's from 1657. Now, there's a record in 1780 of a man on his property on his farm in North Smithfield, and someone came to get that man. And he, with an armed band of Quakers, defended this man, is what the record says. And his granddaughter was very surprised to hear about this because Quakers reject violence. So it was a fairly extreme situation for someone from the Society of Friends to take up arms to defend another person. But he did. You know, for 3 generations, the Buffums worked fearlessly to end slavery. Another held belief of the Society of Friends is that women are equal to men. So women could minister, women could speak in services. This is in the 16 and 1700s. Most people found that very frightening. They really didn't want women giving direction to men. It just wasn't done. The anti-slavery societies in Pennsylvania and New England were very progressive, in part because they had very deep support from the Society of Friends. So these values of women speaking and women participating can trace directly to that. The Society of Friends banned their own members from holding slaves in 1761. So long before that became, 100 years before that, before the Civil War. In Massachusetts, slavery would end in 1781 with a court case. And it was a year after the Massachusetts Constitution was put in place. So the Massachusetts Constitution, 1780, says all men are born free and equal and have certain natural, essential, and unalienable rights. In 1982, that language was changed. So it was changed to all people are born free and equal and have certain natural, essential, and unalienable rights. So the Massachusetts Constitution caught up with the Society of Friends 300 years later. Now, in the 19th century, people were not enslaved in Massachusetts, but they weren't exactly equal. There were still a lot of things going on, and Frederick Douglass, who came to Uxbridge, wrote a little bit about what life was like in the 19th century. So some of the things that were going on in Massachusetts, merchants and mechanics were not allowed to take on black children as apprentices. They could not teach the trades to black people. And the trade still rejected many people of color when trade unions appeared. They were very, very slow to liberate. Black people could not ride inside of carriages or in boat cabins, so if they were traveling on a boat on a river at sea, they had to stay on the deck, no matter what the weather was. They weren't allowed to come inside. If they were riding on a carriage, they would have to stay on top, but they weren't allowed inside. In churches, and this was across denominations, black worshipers were separated from white worshipers. Sometimes they were allowed to sit in the balcony, sometimes they were allowed to sit on the pew in the back of the room, but they weren't allowed to sit with other worshipers. And in New Bedford, there was a punishment for school children. The Society of Friends had education where black and white children would study together, but the black children were separated from the white children even in those schools, and there was a punishment for white children if they misbehaved. They would have to go sit with the black children. So these are the kinds of things that were happening in Massachusetts, even though Massachusetts had made slavery illegal. So some of the things that were happening, and we have this anti-slavery society which is doing all of these illegal things, and one of the things they did is they advertised for apprenticeships for young black children. So in their newspaper, they would find people who'd be willing to teach a trade or to teach school and helping people get connected with that. So back to the Buffums. So 6 of William Buffum's granddaughters would become leaders in the Underground Railroad movement. They all worshipped at the Uxbridge Friends Meeting House down on Quaker Highway. Now, those of you who are still awake will notice that there's only 5 granddaughters on that slide. Nobody's awake. I'll have to take them off. Okay. And that's because Arnold Buffum had a sister, Lucy, and Lucy had a daughter, Lydia, who was also a granddaughter of William Buffum. And Lydia becomes really important. We're going to see Lydia again. So watch for Lydia. Okay? So that's the Buffums. For 3 generations, they were deeply involved in the anti-slavery movement and the Underground Railroad. The other family, the second family I'd like to talk about is the Farnham family. Next to the Friends Meeting House, there is a house from 1766 called the Moses Farnham House. It is still standing. It's still here in Uxbridge. And across the street from both of these properties is the Friends Cemetery. We have, as an oral history, it's not totally documented.
That looks like it could be possibly a mud flood house.
The Farnham House at that location was a station on the Underground Railroad. That's one of the places where people would stay. Moses Farnham was the gentleman who gave the land for the Quaker, or for the Friends Meeting House on Quaker Highway. He was very progressive even for the time, so he spent a lot of his time convincing other people they should give up their slaves. They weren't always willing to listen to him, but he spent a lot of time talking to them. And he also was one of the first to try to make an effort not to buy slave-made goods. And this would become a bigger thing. In the next century, we would have what were called free produce and free labor. So people would try and find sources for molasses, sugar, cotton, various products from the South that were made without the labor of enslaved people. And in Pennsylvania, this became pretty broad, but that was also present here. So these records are a little bit tricky. There are actually 3 Moseses, and they had 2 grandsons, and both grandsons were named Welcome. So when you're looking at different records, you gotta know which generation you're talking about. So the next item is Moses 2. And Moses 2, we believe, was the person who was running the station in that home. Now, Moses 2's grandson, Welcome, one of the 2 Welcomes. Everybody with me? You should have seen me trying to figure this out in the records. Okay. He was a mill owner in Millville. So the Waterford Mill down in that corner of Blackstone, this was his property. He also became president of the Providence and Worcester Railroad, which was an important way people moved north. So the Underground Railroad was not a railroad, except in Uxbridge, where it kind of was. Okay. So we have the most Welcome Farnham, who is the president of the railroad. On the next slide, you see Elizabeth Buffum Farnham Chase, who's a daughter of Arnold Buffum. Still with me? I know I probably should have given a player's card for this one. But she wrote that there was a friendly conductor on Providence and Worcester, and if they needed to move people forward, north, he would agree to provide extra trains for them. if that became necessary. And the conductor on Providence and Worcester was a cousin of our Effingham Caper that we're going to talk about in a minute. So now we have Buffums and Farnhams and Caprins all on the train. So let's talk about another person who is here in Uxbridge, one who shares my name, Susan. Susan was a lady's maid, and her slaveholder died and she was given to a nephew who decided to hire her out. This is something that was done fairly often. She was badly treated. We don't know exactly what happened, but that is the record that is there. It did not go well. We know a little bit about her. There was an 1833 letter that was written by an Uxbridge school teacher named Rebecca Buffum. Does that sound familiar? This is one of the 6 granddaughters. To her sister, Elizabeth Buffum Chase, another one of the 6 granddaughters. So Rebecca Buffum, she was 16 years old when she started teaching school here in Uxbridge. And she wanted to teach children of all backgrounds. So she taught wealthy children, poor children, white children, black children, male children, female children. It was a very unique thing in 1833. So in this letter, she says, Susan supposes her age to be about 28. The principal reason she prefers Worcester, she was trying to decide which way to go, is that the colored people told her that she should learn to read. This is her heart's desire.